meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Sibling rivalry is a very common thing. Unless you're an only child and thus never had brothers or sisters, you may have experienced it yourself. And such rivalries, when applied in moderation, can be healthy things in building relationships between siblings. Yet there are those siblings that see themselves as partners rather than rivals, and through their love for each other build incredible fortunes. In automotive history, there are a number of such families that created great makes of cars. The Stanley brothers, the Henriot brothers, and many more. And the greatest automotive legacy that was created through brotherly love, I believe, undoubtedly, was that which came from the lifelong partnership of the Dodge brothers. Born in the border town of Niles, Michigan, a few miles south from South Bend, Indiana, John and Horace Dodge were 4 years apart, being born in 1864 and 1868 respectively. Their father Daniel owned a small business in South Bend along with his two brothers, a foundry and machine shop. The young Dodge brothers were inseparable and both enjoyed working with their father in the family trade. In 1882, about the time John was completing high school, Daniel moved the family to Port Huron, Michigan, where he set up his own machine shop. This is where young Horace would first show his knack for engineering, as he was key in designing the new business's products, internal combustion engines. Unfortunately, the new business was not a success, and so the family moved to Detroit in 1886, where work as a machinist could be readily found. The brothers were quickly hired by Murphy Boiler Works, so as machinists making parts for marine steam engines. They found more profitable work across the Canadian border as machinists cutting the letters en bloc for a large typography company. They were making good money, and it was during this time that they had a mutual friend, a Mr. Fred Evans, rented out a corner of the factory they worked at and began to make bicycles. The first Evans and Dodge bicycles rolled out of the factory in 1897 and would prove to be good sellers, well made and well priced. All parties involved made a small mint in but a few years, and the partnership was dissolved in 1901, with Evans and the Dodges going their separate ways. John and Horace went back to Detroit and, armed with bags of cash, opened their own machine shop later the same year, making parts for stoves and for cars. Both were gifted machinists, and their reputation for quality work grew quickly. Within a couple of years, they were making parts for Henry Ford, Oldsmobile, Cadillac, and others. Everything from complete engines to transmissions, differentials to drive shafts, and other various car components. Horace was also a capable engineer, having even some patents under his belt for bearings, pistons, and other auto parts. John ran the business and marketing side of things, and by 1903 they were the biggest car parts supplier in Detroit. And it was in 1903 that Henry Ford would make an offer to the Dodge brothers that would eventually lead to the creation of the Dodge car. Ford had just created the Ford Motor Company as we know it today and needed complete drive chains for his new Model A. But rather than write a check for them, Ford offered John and Horace 10% of his company if they would just provide him things to get rolling. Now keep in mind, this was quite speculative. Henry Ford didn't have the best of track records with his new companies, and thus there was a very good chance that the Dodges would pay out the cost for work and never see a return. Yet they agreed to the work, and the Ford Motor Company was able to thrive. Ford offered to do it again when he was preparing to release the Model T in 1908. Dodge would build the T-head engines for the Model T, and in exchange they would each receive 1,000 shares of Ford Motor Company and be on the board of directors. They agreed, and by 1910, the Dodge brothers were the largest auto parts manufacturer in the world. It was in early 1914 that Ford and the brothers parted ways. Here's basically how it came down. Up to this point, the Dodges were being paid through their Ford stock dividends. But in early 1914, Henry Ford announced that future dividends would go instead towards establishing a new Ford factory until further notice. The Dodge brothers didn't like that one bit and decided to cash in their stock and sever their ties with Ford. which Henry Ford agreed to do, paying them $25 million. And merely a few months later, the first Dodge automobiles came out of their factory. They founded Dodge Brothers Incorporated in the summer of 1914, with their first car rolling out of their factory in November of the same year. This car was a game changer. Dodge was already well known for the quality of their engines, transmissions, and such, and John wisely targeted his market above the ubiquitous Model T. Their touring car, the Dodge 3035, had great features. Electric starting was standard, as well as a windshield. It had leather upholstery, a speedometer, a 3-speed transmission, and a 221 cubic inch inline 4 engine producing some 35 horsepower, unlike the 2-speed 20 horsepower Model T that did not have any of these standard features at the time. Priced at $785 as opposed to the Model T's $550, the Dodge cost a bit more, but was truly a value for the money. Comparing his car to the Model T, John Dodge once quipped, "Just think of all those Ford owners who will someday want an automobile." The Dodge brothers plowed their own field through the early American automotive industry. Their cars and trucks were particularly prized by the U.S. military, who would buy Dodges by the thousands during World War I. Alas, the brothers both passed away in 1920, having built a company second only to Ford in U.S. car sales the same year. The legacy of the Dodge brothers lives on today, though many Mopar fans may not realize that their Dodge cars and trucks came from Ford, technically. And of course, the fans of Ford Model Ts might wince because their brass-era cars have Dodge-built engines in them. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.